Torah Obscura Radio Hour, Season 2, The Proceedings of the Academy of the Dream Society, by Michael Diamond. Chapter 13, Morpheus Deferred. What is the action that we enact when we act? And how do we know that it is we who act? Speech to choice to action, a dizzying acceleration. I had dipped my toe across the threshold of the ghost fortress, next stepped after the ghost pact, a diabolical inversion of the holy temple. Yet I was not aware of having made a choice and taken steps in any particular direction. I found myself on I-95 heading north in the passenger seat of Max Israel's VW minivan. I didn't know Max very well. He was a wrestler, terse of speech and fixed of purpose. I made his acquaintance through Loki, his junior high wrestling buddy and my childhood friend. The two of them had been on the junior high team, a rival to mine, before we got to high school. At the time of that ill-fated match, Loki and I hadn't seen each other since elementary school because my family had moved to another hood, though my uncle still had business dealings with his grandfather. I remember junior high wrestling like a bad dream. It was toward the beginning of the season on a Friday night when the phone rang. It was Loki. "Hey, Jake, it's Loki Priest," the voice said with friendly solemnity, allowing for memory and emotion to waft to the surface. "You probably know this, but we're wrestling the same weight in the match on Tuesday. I just wanted to call and wish you good luck." The honor of the samurai addressing his opponent. I didn't know quite what to make of the call. Don't remember saying much of anything of substance in response. Don't remember particularly ruminating about it in advance of the match. In fact, I never thought very much about wrestling at all unless I was either at a practice or in a match. A lot of guys agonized over making weight, practicing their moves, staying in shape. None of that ever remotely entered my consciousness. I was lucky they needed me at exactly the weight I was. My buddy Dante had persuaded me to add wrestling to my repertoire after we had played a successful season of football together. I actually liked football, although the coach was certifiably insane. Fritz Sundowner had the unnerving habit of dropping trow every time a team member came into his office to confer with him. Apparently, his manliness was in constant need of fresh air. His politics, however, stank of the stale air of Joe McCarthy and Dick Nixon. He'd run behind me in practice, snarling, "Not bad for a pinko fag liberal." But Dante assured me that if I wanted to impress Libby Freemartin, it was the thing to do. 2 seasons of Fritz back to back. But Libby was mine, for what was definitely the better part of 1 school year, whatever that meant when you were 13. And willy-nilly, I developed my wrestling chops. The wrestling match with Loki was a disaster, particularly distressing because I was actually a decent wrestler in spite of my lack of enthusiasm for the sport. I made it all the way to the regional championships that season, where I had an even more disastrous match against a young Frankenstein named Mirthless. Pennsylvania was a breeding ground for such monsters of the grappling science. But Loki and I were well matched. I just handed it to him, literally. I somehow managed to fall face forward with my arms crossed in front of me. Loki had the presence of mind to grab both of my wrists, thereby pulling my arms to the sides of my body opposite from whence they were rooted in my shoulders, my hands flapping around useless by my ribcage. An impossible yoga, human straitjacket, nowhere to move. He got me on riding time. I hated wrestling. The remote echo of a roaring crowd, the pools of sweat on the vinyl surface, the unnatural contortions of the human body. Those 2 matches, the one with Mirthless and the one with Loki, were 2 of the last nails in the coffin of my wrestling vocation, at least of the human variety. When the high school wrestling coach, a behemoth of an evangelical Christian, John Jehoshaphat, who insisted on being called Mr. John, played tapes of Christian athletes in action at the beginning of every practice, I knew I was out of there. Johnny stumbled over the finish line with his liver hanging out in his hands, but a higher power had seen him through. No joke. A pulled arm and touch football game was my ticket to the bohemian life. I ruled out high school football as the average weight on the front line was over 1/8 of a ton. Not worth being hazed by the older crew-cut assholes on the squad who had a fondness for Ben Gay. Anyway, the teacher who sponsored the drama club was a fox. Also, though we had long since ceased to be an item, my old flame Libby was in the club, ergo I joined. One of my more serious wrestling buddies, Jeremiah Zeligman, periodically accosted me with a wagging finger regarding the deterioration of my former modicum of fitness. Staring at my gut through duct-taped spectacles, he'd shake his head. "Isaacson, you're getting fat. You better do something." It was easy to ignore him, a man whose professed strategy for getting to class on time was to stare at his shoes until he reached his destination unchallenged by the bell. Turns out, Jeremiah was a prophet, and I had ignored yet another Dream Society prophecy. Loki hooked me up with Max Israel when he found out we two were the only weirdos applying to Herefordshire College in New England. Herefordshire, a small institution dedicated to experimental higher learning. No grades, no required courses, no authority, no rules, no boundaries, no form, no nothing. Though I was a straight-A student, save for having flunked gym for cutting free swim to hang out with the drama teacher and had SATs to match, I declared to my high school guidance counselor that I would be applying only to Herefordshire and to Novelty College in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. Mr. Flummox, a red-haired, baby-faced beanpole of a man with an Adam's apple as big as his nose, simply nodded blandly and allowed as to how that seemed like a pretty good plan, yes sirree, Babadoo. There were no adults on duty in my precinct. Meanwhile, I was busy selling pot out of my suburban house right under my mother Becky's nose. Max had abandoned his parental home and hightailed it out to the sticks on his own, commuted to school by motorcycle. Way too cool for me. He knew this hippie couple that lived with their kids in a house near Herefordshire and supported themselves by making candles and other artsy-craftsy stuff and selling them at hippie craft fairs. Terminal cool. The only thing I remember from that long drive was that after getting off I-95, we drove past a strip of discontinued towns. A fascinating concept. These towns would soon be underwater when a new dam was built and the valley flooded to form a new lake. Where did they all go? The people who lived in the tiny little houses, the tiny little dogs and cats that roamed from house to house, the tiny little businesses and watering holes where the tiny little people gathered. Just so many movable pieces in an HO train set shoved aside to assemble a different model. Maybe a giant hand would just reach in, pick them up, and set them down in an equally idyllic setting, no one missing a beat. Just like Job, wife and family and kids and estates and physical health restored so as you would never know the whole damn tragedy had ever happened. Just keep your trap shut and maybe the master of the universe would skip over you next time it got an itch to move the pieces around again at random. So casual, discontinued. Kind of like my family. The floodgates opened and everything went whoosh. Joe and Louise didn't seem especially happy to have us crashing at their place. An aura of tension crackled the air the minute we set foot in that house. After we set down our packs in the guest room, we joined the unhappy couple and their 2 little kids in the living room for the welcoming ritual of passing around a joint in total silence. I had never gotten high with little kids running around and wondered if it was somehow not okay. What did I know? There was little or no conversation as time dilated to the extreme. The pot was really strong, stronger than the shit we were peddling back home. At this point, the speed of my descent into the maelstrom picked up with alarming celerity. I found myself sinking into a major inward-turning spiral, staring at the other living creatures who were breathing the same air, vibrating with the same sounds, reflecting the same ambient light, yet separated from me by an invisible bubble. There was a dog. Joe seemed very restless, getting up and leaving the room several times, moving with a quickness that was somehow out of step with the overall quality of spaciness. A blob of slow-moving jello engulfed all of space. Louise looked quietly desperate. Suddenly it was all bleeding into my head at once. Joe was going to stay up the street with his mistress, and Louise was not the least bit sanguine about it. I don't have any idea if there was the barest shred of truth in my stone percepts, but I was off to the races in my head. No words could possibly emerge because the doors of speech had slammed shut. A flash out of the corner of my eye. A monstrous cosmic cat got hold of my tongue, and the words were all backing up my cranial nerves into my seething neocortex. Maybe it was the hitchhiker I'd picked up at the Ghost Palace, the one with whom I'd made some kind of unconscious pact, dragging me bound and gagged into its fortress. Suddenly, a torrent of accusations. Who do you think you are? Who are you judging? What the fuck business is it of yours? Who? And on and on and on. Insistent voices, not merely vague thoughts to myself. Even the dog chimed in. The fucking dog. I was terrified. Not my thoughts, oh no, but waves and a veritable sea of mental constructs crashing in great foaming breakers over my skull. The saliva dried up in my throat, my gut heaved, and I was panting for breath. There was nowhere to turn. My road trip companion Max barely knew me, and I wasn't about to reveal to him that his partner in travel was fast descending into lunacy. A dark spirit seated itself upon my head, draped its fore and hind paws over my shoulders, and wouldn't let go. Its bilious poison burned its way inward as the creature's tongue darted into both my ears. Sleep did not come to me at all that night. The visit to Herefordshire's campus the next day left no impression on my terror-struck mind. The ride home with Max was even more silent than the ride up. I could only imagine how irritating it must have been for him to share the small space at the front of a VW minivan with a mute, expressionless wax figure. For my part, I simply wished the hours away. Back home, the devolution continued, though the acute effects of the trip dissipated. My mother and my sister Red no longer existed within my realm of awareness, except as peripheral distractions. I have no idea if they even noticed any of the subtle or not-so-subtle changes in my personality and my behavior. There was still the occasional poker game, and the nights of weed-fueled listening to the National Lampoon Radio Hour in Virgil's attic lair. How his parents didn't figure out what we were doing up there is still a source of mystery. The dope supply lasted most of the year, a cornucopia of neuronal toxins. Then I made a very unpleasant discovery about the status of our stash. Snakeholder and I bounded up the steps to my bedroom to lay hands on some merchandise for a possible transfer of ownership. I shut the doors to my bedroom, opened the door to my closet, removed the access panel to the bathtub plumbing, and reached for the ledge by the drywall where the reefer was stashed. "Shit," I muttered. Snakeholder leaned in. "What is it?" I pulled out the large bag holding the smaller bags of 1-ounce aliquots and examined it with Snakeholder. "Shit," he concurred. The outer and inner bags were perforated with dozens of tiny, jagged holes. I got a flashlight, and we both peered into the space between the bathtub and the wall. With tears in our eyes, we realized we'd been pilfered by stoners of the order Rodentia musculus. Fucking house mice ate our dope, or at least nibbled at it, and spilled a bunch onto the ledge along with plasterboard dust and plasticine scraps and who knows what else. But we weren't about to sacrifice our remaining source of giggles and grins. So we scraped it up, repackaged it, and tried it at the next gathering in Virgil's attic to see if anyone would notice the difference. "Shit!" exclaimed Virgil, sputtering and coughing. "Shit!" we all opined in unison, hacking and gagging on the truly harsh fumes of what then and there was dubbed the rat shit dope. Palatable only when consumed via water pipe, we were not to be deterred. Glass vitamin bottles, corks, and spare glass tubing from the chemistry lab all served admirably for the purpose. The small supply of uncontaminated herb was all we could sell, so we were forced to consume the rest, rat shit or no. Our little group represented a significant portion of the male brain trust of our high school class, eventually to launch into an Ivy League diaspora. I specify male, as there was a cadre of dour young women with whom we had no truck, who occupied the academic space between Virgil and myself at the upper tier of the grade point stratosphere. We erroneously assumed that they were all school-marmish frumps who stayed home nights with their parents doing homework and stitching sensible maxims on linen samplers. What we never knew until years later was that there was another equally dissolute crew of smart-set stoners who dwelt in other climes than ours. The doposphere had ample room for all who cared to burn. A brush with the law and Snakeholder's dad did little to persuade me of the error of my ways, so thoroughly defended was I within the ghost fortress. First shot across the bow, Virgil, Loki, and his girlfriend Trixie, and another comrade in turpitude, Darko, and I all took to the woods on a particularly glorious day to play hooky. As we pierced the foliage, we giggled, ducked under branches, and swung around tree trunks. In a small clearing surrounded by towering oak and conifers, we paused amidst the silence of the pine needles before Loki lit the first bowl. He inhaled deeply, and, with tightly pursed lips, passed the instrument of intoxication to the next in the circle. As one drew on the pipe, the previous one expelled a burst of breath presumably reduced in its cannabinoid burden, a pod of humpback whales sighing, "Here I am." The sole topic, was the pipe still lit? If negative, "Zout," echoed by members of the pod with an escalating sense of hilarity, the derealization of language. Our language did not, however, go undeciphered by the local constabulary. Loki suddenly grunted, "Cops!" and he and Trixie disappeared forthwith after ditching the dope. The other three of us thought he was goofing on us and remained in place, grinning in our stoned befoozlement as a park ranger in full regalia appeared deus ex machina in our midst. "Now, you boys wouldn't happen to be consuming any illegal substances out here in our beautiful state forest?" We all shook our heads, and Virgil managed to mutter, "No, sir." The middle-aged, physically fit officer of the state stood with his hands on his hips, surveying our faces for signs of intelligence. "Well," he began, "you may have heard about the young man at one of the local high schools, college-bound, president of his class, who got caught at a party with a marijuana cigarette." We each felt he was staring straight at us. He continued, "Career cut off before it even began. Real jail time. College rescinded his application. Future remains uncertain." He let that sink in as our heart rates climbed by 10 points, blood pounding in our ears. "I hope you'll pass that bit of information on to some of your friends, who may be less wise than you fellows. Have a good day." And with that, he departed as quickly as he appeared, perhaps into the ether, another Dream Society messenger. We were lucky, or so we thought. Virgil was, as a matter of fact, the president of our senior class, and I was president of the Honor Society. The man had us nailed dead to rights and let us go. We slunk back to Virgil's VW bug and putt-putted our way home in silence. But nothing changed. The nights in Virgil's attic, drunken parties at Darko's house, whenever his parents were out for the night. Another Dream Society missive left unheeded. The delights of vodka and tang are seriously overestimated, particularly when revisited after a bit of predigestion. For a bunch of pretty smart guys, our learning curve was shockingly flat. We received a reprise of the cop's lecture from Snakeholder's dad, no doubt a deputized official of the Academy of the Dream Society as well. He had returned home unexpectedly as we sat around corrupting Snakeholder's nerdy younger brother, Cloud Champion. In addition to weed, we killed King Solomon, 2 bottles worth. As befits the forebear of the future Messiah, King Solomon rose again, and again, from his resting place in CC's gullet. Poor CC hadn't developed the tolerance for ingesting toxins that we young Mithridatians had. I think it was Darko who yelled, "Jesus, the Cohuts are pulling back into the driveway." On goes the kitchen exhaust fan. Away go the bottles and other detritus as we dashed into the living room and plopped ourselves onto chairs just as not innocently as you please, thank you very much. The silence that greeted Winston Kohut as he entered the front door of his house spoke volumes. He retrieved whatever it was he'd come back for, so we thought we were in the clear. Somehow, in our dope-addled brains, we thought that the smell of pot smoke and vomit would have been miraculously evacuated by the piddly little 80-watt fan over the stove. Mr. Kohut strode slowly to the end of the living room, turned around behind Virgil's chair, and brought his hand down on our brainy friend's head with a resounding smack. "You guys," was all he said at first, shaking his head from side to side. Virgil swears he still has an indentation in his skull for Mr. Kohut's wedding ring. Then Winston Kohut fixes a disapprobatory gaze at his son, Snakeholder, my partner in crime. "Snake, you know there's a state trooper who lives next door, right?" Snakeholder either didn't know that fun fact or had failed to mention it to any of us, as if it would have made a difference. Mr. Kohut went on. "This is rank idiocy, you guys. You're all about to head out into the world and do great things. Why would you want to put it all at risk for something so stupid?" The man had a point. We each had some degree of delusions of grandeur in our teenage hubris. Virgil had his eyes set on the Supreme Court, for God's sake. My simple plan was a vague heuristic for acquiring knowledge, all knowledge. Whether I planned to do anything with that knowledge was yet another mystery. Herefordshire College bought my application, or at least I assumed they did. I got in. Fact is, they were not yet accredited and were probably happy to have a student apply with my GPA and SAT scores. Fact is, I didn't know shit. Or, that was all I did know. I knew how to give shit, smoke shit, sell shit, and talk shit. When I wasn't trying to prove that the more abusive teachers on the high school faculty were irremediable fools, I was busy writing stoned essays about Eastern religion and the nature of reality. I really did love that stuff. I have to thank Loki in part for indirectly leading me to it. I spent hours in the school library scouring the shelves for everything I could get my hands on about LSD, a desperate response to Loki's relentless pressure to drop acid. My research led me to Aldous Huxley, Timothy Leary, Houston Smith, and Richard Alpert. The acid reading list was supplemented by a healthy dose of Hindu comic books brought back from India by our comparative religion teacher, Miss Priestley, from her days in the Peace Corps. She was a sweet soul, beloved of her students, even showing up decades later to chaperone our reunions. I devoured everything she gave us to read, but I don't recall having a single what you might call personal conversation with her. I believe that she was hip to my jive. She likely heard the wind whistling through my vacuous soul, swirling among the flotsam and jetsam of a shattered mind, the echoes of half-baked ideas, and the thin thread of guilt winding its way through everything. I was guileless enough to share my stone thinking with anyone who cared to listen or to read the scrawled notes of an evening's metaphysical speculation. Under my bland-faced yearbook photo, I enshrined my state of spiritual absence with the words, "Imagine you see here what you would hope or expect to see." I thought I was a Taoist. No plan, no identity, no attachments, going with the flow. But Miss Priestley saw through me. I had stayed up all night writing a pair of essays on the dynamical interplay of opposites. I, of course, thought I had it nailed, and excitedly handed in 2 essays instead of the required 1. When she returned them to me with her comment, it was brief and a bit of a surprise. "Very interesting ideas here, but where is Jacob in all of this?" Where indeed? Having borrowed a series of identities to suit the exigencies of whatever conversation engaged me, whatever is being demanded of me by any given interrogator, it slowly and eerily dawned on me that I was actually no one going precisely nowhere, and I was getting there with terrifying alacrity. Nowhere. No place from which I could answer such a question, and no mode of discourse with which to entertain the discussion of it. I had a firm toehold in the walls of the ghost fortress, and I didn't have the sense to ask for a hand out of there. I didn't know it at the time, but Miss Priestley, no doubt another agent of the Dream Society, had alerted me to the rabbit hole I was about to descend. Nil per os after midnight, the mystery of the hands commences. Neither food, nor viscous drink, nor evil words shall pass through the lips as one day turns to the next. The nullification starts. Trouble in the bones. Nothing can pass through the narrows. The reed thins to a point where it no longer admits the promised fire. Forethought foregone. Evening and early morning, I take my seat beneath running waters and scrub the outer envelope of my skin free of contaminant invisibilia, vegetal or animal or microbial. Before the purgation begins in earnest, the most severe of the Academy's recent requirements, I forswear my commitments to all that the future waking world might demand of me. 3 decades of having been a particular someone doing something for somebody, forsworn for at least 2.5 weeks, save the serving of potions to needy souls. Only that, of all else I am unhanded. Into other hands I commend my flesh. In the morning, no lotions or balms or aromatic oils may touch me. Naked to touch and smell, I may not avail myself of the perfumer's art. Calls come from pre-admissions, pre-anesthesia, and pre-chirurgery, the interworld agencies for the boots on the ground. I hold converse with them all. Upon arrival at the blasted terrain in which the House of Healing is situated, I wend my way through labyrinths that lead to admissions. It is the palace of a much-neglected deity, paid homage by the poor and suffering who dwell in its environs. Kindly souls, in this blind alley and that one, point us in the right direction. Admissions is unseeing, bureaucratic, no beating of the breast required, the repetition of a well-worn script. My confession is taken by a world-weary woman of stern mien who displays a squad of sea-green nails and sits in a plastic booth that no doubt remodels itself between conversations. I coax a smile from her, though she has been awake since 3 a.m. Her name derives from an Etruscan town, capital of the 7 seas, the vast inland waterway, once in communication with the open sea that still bears her name, now closed by silt and other detritus. One waits in the waiting room for one's fate to unfold. Has my interworld correspondence been sufficient and to the point? Have the avatars made landfall? Are there cases more pressing than my own that must needs take precedence? Shall I flit between chambers, some scant fluid to imbibe? I am called, a rushing of winds. I forget all that I have planned, except to receive my beloved's kiss. I don a winding sheet to bear my innermost to the knife, a fierce yoga of the hand. In the counting of the barley sheaves, it is the day for compassion upon the foundation, my foundation, stripe of essence with which I began my embryonic journey, that now, in the fullness of time, needs repair. I am pulled by teams of mighty oxen, the avatars arrive. I am an avatar among avatars, my story rendered flesh, each word an electronic imprint in the ether. As above, so below. The cart of undoing takes me, conscious yet unafraid, into a chamber of banal horrors, lined with knives, clamps, and vials of noxious gas. It is there they pour me out, until such time as I might arise, the yoga having done its job. I emerge, corrupt tissue excised, to make way for Cerberus's triple-tongued message. My beloved tells me that my tongue was coated with the blessings of Eros, its lesser servant Thanatos satisfied. Caught in an eddy, the sluice gates not yet opened. It will be less than a full day here, remanded to the floor, but the hours are filled with intrigue and the occult. At the hands of some fiend, I am denied the blood potions for keeping the pressure within bounds and ordealed by numbers. Nothing yet for pain, the anesthesia wears thin. One luminous encounter, a disciple of Janus enters my chamber. He is there to bring order and sanitation. I wax eloquent under the influence of nostrums, and tell him of my misfortunes at a nearby palace of healing. As it happens, he is in league with one who oversees that palace. He vows to follow my lead. Digression upon digression, our commerce proceeds at a lively pace, meandering past Enoch and the fallen angels. Our discourse is cut short by other exigencies, perhaps to be continued, perhaps not. I wonder if he is in the employ of Enoch, the Ancient of Days. By day, the queen herself surveys my small realm, a vassal of hers. She is expansive, clever, and attentive of her subject, me. We speak of many things, of her lineage and of mine. In the end, it is her sovereignty that ensures my prompt presence at the outer gates. All praise be to the queen, but not before I have received the blessings of 2 pairs of paler angels. One exuberant pair runs me through my paces, a galumphing Frankenstein, down the halls and up the stairs. The other pair smiles, nods, then yanks my breath along with the last bloody tube that binds me to the bed. My beloved leaves my side to retrieve potions and car. I sit alone. In a wheeled conveyance intended for those less fortunate of anatomy and physiology, I await my chariot, no obvious means for crossing that last barrier. I am reminded, by the inattention of my neighbors and by the scarcity that pervades these corridors, that I am in a place to which I am a stranger, a recipient of its rude embrace, that nonetheless forces flowers from my blasted torso. One wheels me to the spot in silence, another across the threshold, nothing but a final shove. The niceties of badinage do not obtain at the point of departure, nor my overheated imagination, a result of hospital-acquired poetification. Get in the car and go. Just another auto repair, keys in the ignition. The ancestors, according to Holy Writ, wandered the wilderness for 1,000 years, with a rather long intermezzo of indentured servitude, before making final landfall, an ineluctable telos. Sometime after the end of all their meanderings, the old ones inaugurated the 1,000-year kingdom. As those millennial walls crumbled for the second and final time, the finger of the Almighty flicked our people into diaspora for nearly 2,000 years. Then, war-torn and travel-weary, we wandered back to that same place. It's been less than 100 years since the establishment of a new political entity, but already the rumblings of diaspora may be felt everywhere on the globe. The stormy face of the earth-shaker chastens those who would heed its awful import. Change and its faithful attendant chaos wait in the wings. How shall we wend our way through the tumbling of sacred edifice, the severing of kin from kin, the map that knew no cartographer's hand, encrypted in song? The ancestors had it, a map encoded in sacred incantation passed in fragments across time and space. The map was in their mouths and in their bones. They did not look to the sky to name their path, the trail of their walkings. The ancestral world was parsed in 4 directions: Yama, or eastward to the west, the old country, or Kadma, to the east, Teman, the great southern marketplace, and Safon, the mysterious northern forest. The Mediterranean Sea, whence strangers came, the Chaldean land of their origin, Yemen, source of 1,000 spices, and the cedars of Lebanon, each direction a pilgrimage. The lore and text guided the kingdom for 1,000 years. Near the midpoint of the 1,000 years of dwelling in the land, there was a lesser diaspora, subtotal, compelled by an invading force. Some traveled beyond the sea to live among strange peoples, returning to nomadic ways, a newly extended map at hand. Of the nobility, some were slain by assassins, and some departed in captivity, brought in chains to a vastly transformed old country, a country that did not know them. Those that remained in the land and those who returned to it knew it would never be the same, those that could be honest with themselves. An ersatz replica of the original sacred edifice was constructed, and diaspora was the beginning of new maps, circles within circles of law and its endlessly ramifying branches. Map becomes tree, root tenuous, its branches breach the mind. In the aftermath of diaspora, the form fruste of the new map condensed from ether to ramify over time, deployed in the wider world. Among strangers, we had a language, a lineage, and rules of the road, the map. We trusted each other, mostly, and if not, we had a system of arbitration. We were quick studies, able to succeed in the most hostile of climes. The virtual map proved sturdy for nearly 2,000 years, an indispensable survival aid, if not for a given individual, undoubtedly for the community at large. We did not disappear, unlike the Anasazi or the Olmecs or the peoples of the ancient Indus Valley. That virtual map, that tree of knowledge, no longer obtains among many of our people, no guidance sought by them from its well-worn leaves. And many, those to whom it has fallen to guard that sacred text, no longer view the others in the broader community as their brothers. As the sage of Innisfree once said, the center cannot hold. Sun Samao had a map, a lattice work of body and soul, to guide those who wander among shades. Sun was a polymath and a spiritual eclectic, with a keen appreciation for life's pleasures. He knew the rules of the court, the way of the Tao, and the spiritual paths of Central Asia. He was the bearer of an alchemical tradition formed in the face of his people's, the Han's, first loss of control over their hereditary land, the upending of centuries of belief, the rightful order of things. Order upended, the central column wobbles. To retake the center, right the karmic vehicle, Sun Samao had a map, the Ghost Point map. If a person's central column, his essence, proved insecure, it was likely due to invasion by an external entity, a neighboring psychic empire, a ghost. Sun Samao devised the point-by-point repulsion of the invader, his strategy aimed at the invader's path. We are living in a time when ghosts, cruel, debunked ideas, walk the planet in the bodies of men who would rule others by force. My father, laughs last, had a map. With painstaking attention, hour upon hour in his youthful convalescence, he painted and inked it on the back of one of grandfather's industrial calendars. Laughs Last, a.k.a. Izzy, was nearly sacrificed on the altar of grandfather Aby's fervor. Pale and shaken, he lay confined for years within the boundaries of his father's house. The map was the map of his comfort, an imaginary city in which he dwelt unperturbed. It was beautiful. It was weird. It vaguely resembled the actual city where he was born, where he lived alone with his storm-tossed parents. A lifelong invalid, he took comfort in studying the stock market and at night revising the map of his invisible city. I, my father's only begotten son, thought my father, laughs last, a fool in his pursuit of treasure and fantasy until, mapless in the middle of my life's journey, I stumbled onto my own map. My mother, she who binds, availed me of both alien gods and of our own tribal lore in early childhood. She had a reflexive reverence for the written word, no matter its source. So many maps a boy's head might spin, but I absorbed them all. Neither of my parents taught me, unfortunately, how to fend off the importunings of the unwholesome, the ghost realm. They both lived all their years, on account of each their own dark traumas of youth, only a slim purchase on terra firma, 1 foot out the door, in the ghost realm, the lives of nomads who did not know their own nomadic creed. The nomad knows that the wide world abounds with jinn. I had luck in friends and native intellect. Both have served me well in my accidental calling, from which derives my secret tribal name, Who Wrestles with Jinn. My twin, my other, My wild-ass sister Red did not receive quite the dose of cunning as had I, so her fate was to struggle outwardly, while my struggle was more inward. She followed the path of the warrior, and I the shaman Monkey. Monkey, inasmuch as I never chose to assume the mantle, never answered the calling. The phone ran off the hook, I let it go dead. But bit by bit, the accoutrement of that vocation impressed themselves upon me. I look back now, an old man, white of beard, wide of girth, and short a few chunks of flesh, and see the tanka, the tapestry that is me, luffing in the etheric breeze, woven of the bits and pieces of craft and lore that have drifted into the basin of attraction for which I have betimes been the unwitting attractor, gifts of the Dream Society Magi.